Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee Chats with Aisha. I'm super excited to have this conversation with our lovely guest here today. Listeners, you'll be taking away reflections on the transformative power of cross-stitching as a form of personal introspection and self-healing, exploring how art serves as a medium for uncovering self-truths and overcoming trauma as shared by our guest today, Bayan. Bayan is a Palestinian writer, poet, licensed social worker, Tatreez instructor, and founder of Badan Collective. She has a master's in social service administration from the University of Chicago and resides in the Chicagoland area. She founded Badan on the premise of keeping the tradition of Tatreez, Palestinian embroidery, thriving in the diaspora, which has allowed her to teach Tatreez courses all over the nation. Please welcome our lovely guest, Bayan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Alaikum
barakatuh.
salam. How are you? I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for joining. I am really, really excited about our conversation today. I know we had a little bit of an intro call earlier, so I'm really excited for listeners to really hear from you, to hear your perspective, to hear you kind of talk to the themes of self-healing, using art as a medium for yourself, and just like
Mhm.
uncovering your own self-identity and discovery. So thank you so much for being here. But before we, jump into things, fun question that I love to ask all of our guests. Do you like coffee?
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for having me too. I'm so excited for our conversation as well. And not to be a bummer, but I'm not a coffee person. I'm a tea person, and I feel like my favorite kind of teas are just chai, anything that has like spices and milk in it and black tea. So that's like my go-to, but not necessarily a coffee person.
That's okay, dude. I will indulge in coffee if there's like a cute cafe scene that's happening.
Yeah,
Otherwise, tea is my go-to. Everyone knows this.
yeah.
Boba is a huge thing for me. So like
Mhm.
that's when I'll get my caffeine. Okay, awesome to hear. I kind of emphasized this in the beginning. You are the founder of Badan Collective. Would love to just allow people to understand what it is. So, why Badan? What is it? How did you get started with it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, thank you for asking. So Badan, the official name on Instagram is Badan Collective, but we just go by Badan, is essentially a creative design house and educational space for Tatreez, which is Palestinian embroidery. So we focus on teaching a lot of classes, whether most of them are in person. We hold just different educational ways for people to engage with Tatreez. We have Tatreez kits on the website, and really just allowing people the bridge between them here in the diaspora and learning Tatreez, which we've kind of been disconnected from that, by virtue of being in the diaspora. So I just want to be that bridge. And then also a creative design house in terms of like designing Tatreez items and putting them out. So we're working towards that, doing that more actually this year, inshallah. So it's a really nice, fun space, and it's also really great to have community come together. And yeah, I'm just very proud of it.
Oh my gosh. I love to hear that. And then,
Mm.
as part of like, the context and the background of yourself, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about yourself and specifically, your journey with art, how it maybe led you to Tetris and then we'll talk about, I know you're also a poet, so we'll talk about poetry in a second
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, well, I think this question is twofold because does anyone really know how they get to art? I was trying to think of this answer, not only in terms of Tatreez, but also in terms of my poetry, and I really couldn't come up with like one way that I arrived at both of these things. I think a lot of people might arrive at Tatreez with this, they find out about it and then they want to learn about it, and then maybe they start charting that path. For me, I think both of those arts have been a part of my life since I was like 10, 11. So I really don't think there was a time where it just wasn't a part of me. There was a big time where I denied that it was a part of me, which we'll talk about. But I think it's always been there. And just allowing it to um embracing it has been a really amazing thing. So for me, it's not something that I sought after. I think it was just always a form of expression that just kind of came out of my heart, and it was just a passion that I shared. So I think I would say that.
Oh my God. Awesome. And so perhaps maybe reframing the question, why did you choose poetry and Tatreez maybe as a
Mhm.
medium of self-expression and healing?
Yeah.
What drew you to them?
Yeah, so I think for different reasons for both of them, right? Because both of them really allow you a different kind of self-expression. So for poetry, I vividly remember when I was younger, I really, really loved the idea of just like having a pen and a paper. I moved around a lot when I was a kid, so I think we were disconnected from friends quite often. So it was really nice to just have like a paper and a pen as a friend. And I, even now that I'm older, and alhamdulillah, I have a really great community, really great friends and family. But sometimes it's like just nothing. No one will understand you like your paper and pen, like just pouring your heart out. So I feel like poetry and writing and journaling and short stories have just always been a safe space to just land. And I think any writer that loves, especially writers that love journaling, I think will say the same thing. It's just like kind of like your safe little space that's like sacred to you. So I think for me, it was a safe haven. And then for Tatriz, it was, I think, really something that just kept me busy in with time, and also allowed me to create something really beautiful. So we'll probably also talk about this in a second, but the way that Tatriz is kind of healing with its way that it engages your hands is so incredibly important. So it was yeah, it was just something that I kept up when I was younger to make use of my time. I think I was really big on that hadith of like take advantage of five before five. And I told myself, because I was like, when I was younger, I was like, how does Tatriz relate to my akhirah? Like, how does it relate? Maybe in poetry, I can see it. There's a lot of like self-improvement, self-reflection, tadabbur. There's all those things connecting to God. I wrote, I write sometimes about spirituality in my poetry, so it's there, but like, how does Tatriz relate to this? And I believe that there's this I don't want to it's a saying by Amr bin al-Khattab that said that if you cannot benefit or take your time to benefit your akhirah, then at least make your time benefit your dunya. And I don't know if that's a word for word translation, so we probably should look that up to confirm. But for me, that's how I viewed it when I was younger, and I was like, you know what? Let me at least benefit this life, benefit, create something beautiful, and something that engages my family, engages my community, and in that way, it also in a way benefits my akhirah. So
Mm.
that's how I got into it. And these are things when I was younger. So obviously it's changed
Yeah.
dramatically over time and how I relate to it now. But I think those things are still foundations.
I love that, subhanAllah. And so you talked about this, and I'd love to dive deeper into it. We
Hmm.
understand that Tatreez is often associated with tradition, preservation, and also resistance, a symbol of resistance.
Hmm.
But I want to, and you mentioned this right now, you described Tatreez as a form of healing,
Hmm.
beyond preservation, some of these concepts we just talked about. Can you elaborate on this? What does that look like? How is Tatreez a medium for healing, personal introspection?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm so glad you asked because I think in right now in the discourse, in the mainstream discourse at least, I think there's a lot of conversations about how Tatris is a form of resistance, and that is always there. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because for Tatris, at least for me, it's always meant more than that. And of course, like any Palestinian craft that exists and that is practiced and that is preserved by default is going to be an act of resistance. And there are ways that we can intentionally resist through art. And I think that that is incredibly important. But for us as a people, I'm always intrigued about how Tatriz is a passion. Tatriz is a way of life, right? Like outside of this occupation, as a Palestinian people, okay, what is Tatriz? Like outside of that. And I think for me, the answers are always It's a passion, it's a way of life, it's art, it's to create something beautiful. It comes from the heart and from the soul, and it is also incredibly communal. It's a community-based activity, and it is an incredible tool for healing just because it engages the body. That's one of the most important things that I would say, especially for a people that have been through generational trauma. I think when it's passed down, and we have an understanding that trauma is passed down through the body, especially from really great books and works of art like The Body Keeps the Score. And we understand how generational trauma is passed down through the body and how it's stored in the body, and how we need to engage the body in order to release some of that trauma, or else it will continue to stay there, and it will in fact, if left untouched, it will actually end up creating illnesses for ourselves and our bodies. So when you're talking about a people that has gone through this generational trauma, pre and post 1948 in so many different ways, especially now with what's happening, in Gaza with the assault on Gaza. We need to be engaging our bodies in that healing, and it can be an incredible tool to not just speak, because there's only so many words that can be said, but you need to engage your hands, engage in community. Like the community aspect of Tatreez is incredibly important. Being in unison with others, even in silence, just practicing a cultural practice, that in of itself is just healing. Just being in a room together, whether you're just drinking coffee or making food or whatever it is you're doing. So then when you add on the Tatreez element in that gathering and you're engaging your hands and you are doing these patterns that are so repetitive over and over and over again. And with that is some ASMR sounds that come from the needle and the thread and the pulling of the waist canvas and the fabric and just the sensory nature of Tatreez and the way that it engages you. It allows you like this release. And I think the most common answer that I get after I teach any of my workshops is sometimes I'll ask students like, what was one word that you would use to describe today? And some people say fun and community and beautiful. And then the most common answer is usually that it's meditative or that it's therapeutic. And I think that has really, really great benefits for us in the diaspora, but also especially eventually for those in Palestine themselves who, of course, do Tatreez, but I know that there are some folk out there who are now exploring how they can, look to make Tatreez more of a form of healing for the people in Palestine on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. The way you speak about it is beautiful, and I love that we positioned the concept of healing as the forefront, typically of art and an artist's journey. And so this section of our conversation, I love to like touch on the theme of a journey of healing. So my first question under this like theme is, how has your artistic journey and the process of creating art helped you in your own personal journey of healing? And so are there any specific instances or moments that stand out to you in particular?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any one big grand moment that will tell someone how, art has been healing for them. I think it's a bunch of small, consistent actions that lead you into this path of self-reflection and self-growth. And so for me, it's more so been like that. And I think the more like potent one is poetry, because it's so self-reflective, because when you write you have to sit with yourself, you have to think, you can't hide from whatever's going on, emotions, grief, pain, things that you want to change about yourself, even some not so great aspects of your character that you think need improving, when you sit and reflect on that. And that's why I think tadabbur is like a concept that is brought up over and over and over again in the Quran. It's like أَفَلَا تَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So it's a big deal in Islam for a reason. And I think for the longest time in my life, that big portion of my life was like 10 years. I mean, I started writing when I was 10. So imagine writing when you're 10 till now. And I remember there was this one letter that I wrote to myself when I was 21. And that was like the first time that I was like, what do I actually not like about myself? And if I'm going to address it at any point in time in my life, it's going to be right now. And if I, graduate, I'm going to graduate next year. Like, who do I want to be? Right. Like, so you really start to think about that and think about who you want to be. And that reflection is incredibly important. And I think any art form should lead to a sense of self growth, or at least a little bit of self growth or self expression in some way. But I would argue that any self expression is a form of self growth. It helps you grow. And for me, doing that on a consistent basis with poetry, and obviously in parallel, I was doing Tatreez at the same time. But I think it eventually led me to a point where I, because so when we're talking about this conversation of healing, I think really quickly, the thing that's missing is, in order to heal, you need to be connected to your heart. And I think when you go through things that can be traumatic, not everything can be considered trauma. Sometimes there's just life grievances and turbulences. But there are things that are traumatic sometimes that we often go to, especially those of us that come from immigrant families, that I think disconnect us from our heart. And I think writing for so long, just it allowed me to pour out, and it allowed me to get to a point where I could connect to my heart. So that eventually, when I started charting down the path of Tatreez, that was coming from my heart, that was a passion for me, and that's where it came from. It kind of like collided and just let me burst out even more. So it was like writing, and writing is, still its own thing, but writing kind of led me to fully like explode in my Tatreez world. Because again, art, and really great art that connects, it has to come from the heart. You can't just, you can do anything that you want, but if you really want to create a piece that resonates with someone, it has to engage your heart. And if you're disconnected from that, you're also going to be disconnected from yourself and also from others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you talked about this like concept of self growth that happens throughout this
Mhm.
process. And so, art can be transformative on people's lives. It has an impact very clearly. What have you personally witnessed in terms of your own personal growth and healing through this art, journey of your own, and maybe experiences of others as well that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly transformative, 100%. Um, you know, for me, it's art. And I would never have thought that I could have said this a couple of years ago, to really think of myself as an artist and a creative and to use those titles. But I think, and not to quote The Artist's Way, which is a really great book for any artist that's looking to pursue their art even more. But I really don't think that there is a differentiation between yourself and your artist self. I think there's no point in time where you're just not an artist, you're just a blocked artist. And so for me, it's like I can't even pinpoint it. Maybe it's because I've been doing it for so long that it's like I don't know if it's my art that was the transformative part, or it was just, also growing up and growing. But I think having the two in parallel to one another, happening, really has led to me transforming into who I am. And I just don't think I would know where I would be today if I did not do these two things. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, it's it's really I've had the pleasure of witnessing you embody, that art. And I've heard numerous
Mhm.
people from that workshop that I attended of yours touch upon those concepts of healing, growth,
Mhm.
and community. And you mentioned that as
Yeah.
well. And so what advice do you have or would you give to someone who wants to start their own journey of healing through art, but perhaps doesn't know where to begin.
Hmm. Yeah, so, one of the things that comes to my mind with where do I begin? And I know this sounds like a cop out to some, but it's like whenever you want to begin something, you've already begun. Like the fact that it's a thought in your head, like, God gave that to you. If you want to start treading down that path, that is, you've already started. Now you just have to actually act on it, and that comes with like any sort of achievement that you want to do, but it also applies to the actual art itself. Because I think often what we do is we're like, I'll do this when I'm ready. I'll do this when I'm perfect. Do this when I have time. I'll do this when I can sit. And that goes even for things like I'll start Tatreez here. I'll do this painting later. I'll journal later. It's like, you're just like waiting for all these things to happen. And it's like, just do it. Just approach yourself messy. Like you don't have to be perfect. And by the way, I see this with a lot of students that come to my classes. They always want to do and have their tattoos be so perfect. Like, and I'm like, just sit in your imperfection for a minute and let it be. Like, let yourself be, let yourself flow. Art is, again, when it comes from your heart, it flows and it's meant to flow. And it's not meant to be, you can guide it, but it's not meant to be disciplined or, you know, kind of encapsulated. Just let it flow. And I think even just think of it as like, you're approaching like a paintbrush and a canvas. Just express what's coming out of you. That's a means of expression. Even a paper and a pen. I also used to also approach writing in this way where it was like, sometimes I would like write a poem and capture my emotions, but when it came to journaling, I would be like, oh, I had to have this like perfect journal prompt, and I had to like have hours and hours of time to write, and I had to like have all these like elements that I thought I needed. And I started this like activity. It's a kind of like a book, monthly meeting that I would do with friends, and it's the artist's way. And she has this concept of the morning pages, which is a journaling exercise that you do every morning, and it's you write down you fill in 3 pages and you just let it flow. It's not allowed to be perfect. You just 15 to 20 minutes, you write, even if what you write is blah, 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 that's what you're going to write on the paper. And you kind of let subconsciousness kind of just come to the forefront, and you just let it flow. And I think doing that practice over and over and over again, eventually it will get you to where you want to go. Whether art is just a form of self-expression for you and like, you want it to be a one-off, you just need that self-expression, or your art is something that you actually want to pursue. In either case, it's just like start with your heart and let it flow.
I love that because I too have gotten so caught up in this chase of perfection that it has hindered the
Mhm.
beginning. And so how do you start something when you haven't physically started or, internally started out of fear or out of these pressures that you've put on yourself? And I've
Yeah.
had it's mental roadblocks that you have to like go through and have these mindset shifts to understand that, to your point, just starts with the heart and let it happen, let it flow.
Yeah.
um, and I have found that that has helped me, overcome like hurdles or mental, like you said, blocked periods when it comes
Yeah.
to just being stuck or being in a rut of an
Hmm.
artist's journey of the next thing that they're trying to put out or pursue. And so I
Hmm.
love that, you said art is meant to flow, like not
Yeah.
need, doesn't need to be perfect. Um, I thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that because that's something I'm also going to be taking away. I journal as well, and so I'll be writing that
Oh,
one liner down in my journal just to remind myself of
yeah.
just allowing myself to be present in the moment and letting either that pen take flow or even when I'm editing, let just go for it. And like you said, just do it.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
SubhanAllah.
I love that. And I sometimes when I find these like lines that I absolutely love, I'll write it down and I'll put it like in front of me in my like office space in front of my desk. And it just kind of helps me remember these like pivotal moments that like you have these like awe moments, like these like moments of awareness, and you're like, you just put it there because it's like, okay, this is how I should think about this. And yeah, that's just so incredibly important.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I know we positioned healing at the forefront of that journey of art. I would love to pivot into the other, two concepts that I mentioned at the beginning of self-reflection and introspection as well. And so I
Mhm.
I've often feel like, many people struggle with self-healing and introspection. And so I would love to hear your perspective on sharing some insights on how art can be a tool for individuals to delve, deeper into the self-reflection process.
Yeah, how art can help people delve into the self-reflection process. That is such a interesting way to phrase that question. I think, the one thing that comes to mind is you're reminding me a little bit of some reflections that I had years ago, especially when you're talking about people being afraid of that self introspection or self reflection. And I think the fear is really the thing that reminded me of this because I think when it comes to healing and when we're talking about healing, of course, art is a medium to heal, but just healing in general, no matter what you do, whether you do you're participating in arts or whether you're going through talk therapy or whether, whatever you're doing that is on your journey to healing, I think the main reason that we hide from that is often because there's a lot of pain behind the door to healing. And it's like you're here, then there's the pain, and then there's the healing in your actual, like, authentic self that needs that self expression. And you have to ram through the door of the pain in order to get there. And I think often people are really, really afraid of that. And I don't blame people. I really don't, especially some of us that have, we all have, at some point or the other, have had, you know, what we can call like toxic behaviors or things in our characters that were flaws that needed to be we needed some growth there. We needed, to grow. And I think um we hide from that, and sometimes we kind of like blame those people, and we're like, oh well, they're just a toxic person, they're just this, they're just that. Well, like, why are they like that? And I think from somebody who, and I feel like, nobody's perfect. I feel like at some point in time, I did some things that were like, again, character flaws as well that might have, hurt a few people here or there. And I think it's like when you get to the other side, you kind of realize like, oh, like maybe it was me. Like maybe it wasn't the world that was against me. Maybe it was like me that was against myself. And maybe what I was really afraid of was going through that door of pain. And I think a lot of us hide from that because it's so painful to get through. And we're talking about grief here too. And it's like, once you realize that you're on a path to healing, there's so much grief that comes from that. Grief from loss of time, grief from, what you've gone through in life, grief for just so many things. And it's like you have to grapple with that grief. Like you can't run from it. And I think oftentimes people are really scared to get through that, and they let their fear stop them, they let their insecurities stop them, and they don't chart the path, they don't keep going. And I think my biggest advice to anybody would be, it might be a few months, and depending on your life and your life's journey, and everybody's life's, journeys are and experiences are different, but depending on what you've gone through in life, sometimes it can take you some months and sometimes it can take you years. And I know people who have charted down the path of healing and they're still there, and it's like you deal with a lot of emotions of feeling stuck and feeling behind, and just so many things that you have to grapple with as a person. And you don't just get to healing, you don't just arrive, you don't just like shine in your light and be authentic. You have to go through some stuff. And I always say this whenever you see anyone that is like, in their light, in their like element, um they're experiencing some form of celebration or joy. I'm always adamant that joy and grief run in parallels. And so whoever has had, or whoever seems to have some really great moments in their life, they either have, are going through, or will go through some form of grief. And they have to run in parallels. You cannot hide from that. And so if you're thinking about self-reflection in that way, it's like, don't hide from yourself. And it's incredibly lonely. And I feel like I want to validate that if anyone is going through that. Like, it's so lonely to go through that. But I think eventually, when you uncover all of these layers of yourself, and Allah will start distancing you from people too, right? And that's why it also gets really lonely, because now you no longer relate to the people in your life that you were in your life when you were not at your best self. So you have to also let them go. And eventually you will get to this place where you connect with yourself, you connect with your heart, you are now in your best element. And eventually, you putting that energy out will attract more people to you. And then you start to like build, right, community, like one after the other. And you end up with more friends and more community in this you beautiful best version of yourself. And that doesn't mean that you leave people behind, but it's just like the version of yourself that connected with them no longer connects with them, and you have to ask yourself, why. And so sometimes it takes a really long time for people to get there. And I think it really, at the end of the day, it takes courage. And I think, so I would encourage people to be courageous and to validate yourself and to celebrate the fact that you have been courageous. And for me, I think this is what I was talking about earlier about how writing my paper and my pen were my safe haven. They were my friend for a very long time. And I think journaling is going to be your best friend throughout this, or any sort of means of medium, any medium of art that you are participating in, even if it's just the Tatreez, right? Like those moments of alone time, or if you're kind of self-isolating during this time. Okay, great. Now you have a lot of time. Do Tatreez, right? Build something beautiful, right? Those things are become your friends in times that are very difficult, when you are going through that. So yeah.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I love that. And you said something so beautiful, uncovering layers of yourself. Um,
Mhm.
I'd love to end our discussion or conversation with that, taking in what
Yeah.
does uncovering layers of yourself look like. So, in your work and your personal journey, you've talked about this. You've spoken about uncovering layers of yourself. Could you share some examples of how your art has allowed you to explore and reveal aspects of your own identity and experiences?
So when we're charting down this path of, self-expression through art, what it ends up teaching you is this way of being that bleeds into other areas of your life. So when you, for example, let yourself flow through art in your personal life and just express in that way, without you knowing, what you're doing is you're building your mind's capacity to process how much you can actually let flow in other areas of your life. And so what I mean by that is, let's say I kind of like journal, or do make a painting, or just do something where I just express myself. It's not perfect. I just put it on paper, or put it on canvas, or put it wherever. And then eventually, like this practice over and over and over again, what it's building is resilience inside of me to make that connection in my mind that life doesn't have to be perfect. I just have to do it. So when it comes to you actualizing certain projects in your life, when it comes to you going to events and meeting certain people, I remember having instances where I would just like go up to people, and I would just like say hi and like start a random conversation on like a coffee line at this like really huge like event. And it's like, I remember like at a time where I was, younger, where it's like I never would have done that. I was not a social anyone who meets me nowadays is like, wow, you're so social. And I'm like, you should have met me 5 years ago. So no, but what it did is it really built that resilience to just kind of like you know what? This doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a conversation, like chill, right? Like just do it. Or eventually when you start, bigger projects for artists that really want to make their art, a part of their life, you really start to say, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, just do it. And you start doing these like smaller things, like, you know what, baby steps. Let me just email so and so. Let me just, reach out here. Let me just poke around here. Like you kind of just like really start to build that resilience in you and build that way of being where it's like, okay, things don't have to be perfect anymore. And I think that's just one example. There are so many, but that is one experience that I've had that it kind of is character building in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and in terms of uncovering, self truths and layers of yourself that you've mentioned, we touched upon, trauma a bit, but I love to just kind of dive deeper. Trauma is a deeply
Mm.
personal and challenging experience. How can art be used as a means to help individuals overcoming trauma and then, finding their path to healing through that? I know you touched upon validating the loneliness, the isolation that
Mm.
maybe comes with that process, but how does one actually use it, use art, or just generally, what does that path of overcoming trauma look like?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really good and important question, especially for our generation now, because a lot of us are healing from that. Trauma is, I think, a big word, and there is a lot of connotations around it nowadays with, everything is trauma, and it's like not everything is trauma. And also like, trauma does require some expertise. There are complex trauma therapists out there. There are licensed professionals out there. So I can only speak about it to a very specific, in a very specific way within the capacity that and the expertise that I'm able to offer. But so I'm not specialized in trauma, but I think, in a way, what we can do is, art therapy is a thing for a reason, and I think there are some things that cannot be addressed through talk therapy, and talk therapy is what people consider normal, quote unquote therapy nowadays, where it's, you go into you talk to your therapist for an hour, and of course there's a plan, and there's a plan for termination as well, where you're not going to be here forever. It's a treatment plan. How can we get you through what you're going through so that you can learn coping mechanisms so that you can exit therapy with the best tools that you can start handling these things on your own. That's usually what people think of when they think about therapy. But art therapy is a thing, and I think it's a really, really important tool for those who have gone through some sort of traumatic event, whether it's like a big T trauma, like a capital T trauma, or lowercase trauma. And complex trauma is its own thing, as well, for those who have gone through really, really incredibly difficult things that no human has the capacity to go through. But I do think for the average person, in community, that has gone through some turbulence in their life, that has had maybe parental figures that have not necessarily been capable or able to meet their emotional needs when they were younger. Those things can cause, lowercase kind of aspects of trauma that still need to be dealt with. And I think art is an incredible tool for that, because for somebody that's grown up in that type of environment, or somebody that is still in that kind of environment, and somebody that might not be, or might not have had the awareness that they have needed to deal with that, I think art can be a really important tool for you, because I think one of the main things that people struggle with, aside from that fear that we were talking about, is really shame. And I think shame is so deadly, and it's so subtle, and it's so silent, and you don't realize it's there. And you don't realize that it's there because of things like you're not being seen or heard. And when you come up in environments like that, not feeling seen, not feeling heard over and over and over and over again, what you're doing is you're really, in a way, shaming yourself from not feeling like you can be seen and heard, and you start to seek all of this outside validation. And you don't need it. You don't need outside validation. You don't need to be a people pleaser in order for people to give you the love that you so desperately want. You don't need all of those things. And I think, of course, and I'm not saying that we need to heal on our own, right? I don't glorify that. I don't glorify, I think self-love is incredibly important, but I don't glorify healing on your own, especially when you've gone through relational trauma. Like, you've been hurt by other people deeply. um you need community in order to heal that. Like, you can't, like, if your trust has been incredibly broken by someone and now you mistrust everyone that comes your way, the only way, you can do a lot of healing on your own, you should, right? You need to do some self reflection there, and introspection, and kind of like let your self settle and heal through that. But also you need to start, in order to trust other people, again you need to start allowing people in again, and you need to heal that, and you need safe and healthy people, to welcome safe and healthy people into your life so you can trust people again. So I'm not glorifying this idea of self, that you can heal all by yourself, but I do think that it can be an incredible tool to start saying, like, okay, where am I even, like, where is this shame? Why do I feel shame, right? And this is why writing is an incredible tool, because it will come out of you, things will come out of you that are not on your conscience mind. And shame is not really something that we think we're doing every single day. It's deadly, and it's silent, and it's subtle. Like, remember that, because sometimes there will be things in your life that will happen. And this is why, again, healing in relation with others, because sometimes people will be mirrors to you, and you will start realizing with the people in your life, you're like, wait, wow, like, especially when, like, someone really sees you, someone really hears you, and you're like, wow, like, okay, I am this and so and X, Y, and Z. Like, why was I shaming myself out of that? Right. So you need people to do that. But I think, again, writing and expressing it will help you realize where that shame is, and especially in relation to self-sabotage. Like, if you are somebody that self-sabotages yourself often, I want to ask yourself why you just self-sabotage and you don't want success for yourself. It's like, where is the underlying shame in that? And why do you think you're not worthy of it? That is the biggest question you could ask yourself, is, why do I think I'm not worthy of this thing? And you realize that that component of worthiness is so incredibly important, because when you ask yourself, oh, am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of rest? Am I worthy of friendship? Am I worthy of success? Am I worthy of going to Jannah? Right? Like, all of these questions, when you ask yourself about your worthiness, that shame starts to come out. Oh, I don't think I deserve it because X, Y, and Z. That voice that pops in your mind, that's what you need to capture, and you need to put it on paper. And you need to release it, and you need to work to remove that voice out of your head, because it's not yours. And it was never your voice. That was shaming you into thinking that you didn't deserve certain things. So there's so much to this conversation, but I think art, writing is an incredible tool here. But like we were talking about earlier, when you practice something over and over and over again, even with something like Tatreez, even with something like, pottery or painting or anything, when you do something over and over and over again that just expresses what's inside of you, even if you just made a painting of, like, what does shame look like to you, that's you capturing a feeling, that's you expressing. You do that over and over and over again, eventually your brain will catch up and will allow you to really uncover what's actually the root of the issue.
I love that framework that you kind of, I feel like, suggested, is walking through asking yourself certain questions, to
Mhm.
understand, to pinpoint where is that self-talk coming from, and how can I
Mhm.
overcome my own narrative, and redefine, um, the next steps for myself as you move forward alongside that narrative of what you define. I
Mhm.
absolutely love it. I was taking mental notes as you were kind of pushing those questions, and I do hope listeners take those questions and really, really sit with them, and either write or just kind of like walk through them as an exercise. We're nearing the end of our conversation today, and as you said, there's a lot to it. There's a lot to unpack. But if you wanted to just sum up perhaps a message or insight that you would like to leave with our listeners, what would it be as they explore the theme of healing through art and personal introspection?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would leave people with this idea that don't be afraid to confront yourself. Don't be afraid to uncover the layers of yourself that have been covered, especially if you are a little bit older. We've all gone through something in life where, we've had people's perceptions or expectations, or sometimes the pain that we were talking about earlier. All of those are layers, right? That get put on us over time. And it's like, okay, if you're, first of all, if you're asking yourself all of these questions, you're already on the right path. But you need it, so it's a lot of work. So you have to uncover layer by layer. What is this? What is this? And they all feed into each other. It's not like, oh my God, I have to do so much work. It's like they will all feed into each other. Um, I think there was like this formula I wrote down one time. I don't remember it exactly, but it was like if you trust yourself, you begin to trust your intuition. If you trust your intuition, you start to build your confidence. If you start to build your confidence, you start to be more authentic. And it was like all of these things feed into each other. So once you start to uncover those layers, even through the pain, even through the hardship, even through all of the difficulty, and you really start to you not, when I say confront yourself, I mean like confront the part of yourself that you're hiding from, and then reclaim that, because you're uncovering all of these layers, but you're also doing a lot of reclaiming in that. Who actually am I? What do I actually want to do? Because it's there. It's not like you have to go outside and somewhere random and find it. No, yourself is there. You just have to go through this tunnel. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dark tunnel, right? Everybody's experiences are different. But when you go down that path, down that tunnel, like you will find yourself at the end of that tunnel, but you have to just not be afraid to go down that path, and it takes a lot of courage. So if you're already there, like I would give yourself a pat on the back. I would celebrate yourself as well. No one is going to celebrate you in those moments. They will not. I will tell you that right now. There is a lot of people that will celebrate you afterwards, and that might get really annoying, and that's fine, and that's okay, because you're meeting them at the new version of yourself, and that's okay. They weren't there before, and that's okay. And you don't, that needs to be fine. But sometimes we do need to go through moments of loneliness in order to reclaim ourselves, and I think it's incredibly important to incorporate a lot in that. At one point in time in the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I he felt incredibly alone, especially I believe it was Ta'if. It was Ta'if when, he was there to give da'wah, and he was kicked out of that um area, just and very hurt and very harmed. And he, was just saying, like, as long as Allah is not angry with me, as long as Allah is still with me, I'm okay. And that's fine. And that's fine. And we have to realize that people have certain capacities and other people don't. And you go down that path, you be courageous, you have your God, you have your Allah, and you will get to yourself at the end of the tunnel. You will also connect with others, and you will find your community and your friends at the end of that tunnel too.
SubhanAllah. Always having that compass that, you know, towards Allah. Like that if hypothetically everyone is not no longer, with you, around you, surrounding you as you are going through that path, you have Allah on your side.
Yeah.
And like you
Yeah.
said, it might be hard to reconcile with the fact that maybe people won't be there to celebrate with you and that they will meet your new version later down the road, but you
Hmm.
need to keep going. And you have the ultimate helper on your side, inshallah.
Yeah.
Really beautiful way to kind of like end our conversation today, that you will find yourself at the end of the tunnel, so long as you take those steps to get there, to find that light through that darkness. Before, we say our salams at this conversation, I would love to hear, to sum up our conversation that I ask all guests, what is a lesson learned that you know now, that you understand, that you wish you could have told your younger self?
So many. I think the number one thing would be a life lesson, I would say, is to just persevere and keep going. And I think that lesson is something I actually knew when I was younger, and I was like, I don't know where I'm going, but if I just keep going, I'll get there. And I just think something I would really love to tell my younger self is like how proud I am that she kept going. And I think eventually anyone that continues to go down the path of consistency and perseverance and resilience, you eventually do get to a place where you're like, wow, like I actually now am on the other side, and I'm really, really proud of that. And yeah, I'm proud of that, and I would just encourage, I don't know, little Bayan to just keep going. So
Yeah,
and
keep
anyone
going.
else as well that's going this. Yeah, just keep going.
Keep going. I love it. SubhanAllah. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing,
Thank you.
everything that is to healing through art, as you uncover self-truth and you overcome trauma and you are trying to reclaim your best self. And so thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared. Whoever's listening, I will be linking everything about Bayan in the description below, so you can follow along, read her poetry, be able to purchase and share the power of Tatreez with her as well, amongst several different people across the nation as well. So thank you again, Bayan, for being here. Pleasure talking to you as always. And I wish you the absolute best in your next phase of being an artist and a creative. And I can't wait to also personally watch you grow as well.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Aisha. This conversation was beautiful. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So as a recap, listeners, today you heard Bayan herself talk about Tatreez, poetry, but also specifically those forms of art as a means of introspection and self-healing, exploring how these mediums can serve as a possibility and an opportunity for you to uncover self-truths and overcome trauma. Inshallah, stay tuned for the next episode, and I'll see you back at this YouTube channel. Thank you so much for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.